Turn over to Exodus 20th chapter, continuing our study in the book of Exodus here, and we're in the commands right now, and in that command in verse 12, Exodus 20 verse 12, this is familiar to all of us, and yet is so critical and so important that we observe this, that we put it into our life as a life principle, because it will affect everything about us. It says, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. And realize that this was a focus that was given to the children of Israel. He was giving and focusing upon them coming into the promised land, the land of Canaan. We look to where we're headed. We're headed to a wonderful promised land too. That's a guarantee. And we're going to get there because of the grace of God. I think they got to where they got to because of the grace of God too, because they had a lot of problems, a lot of issues, a lot of sin, a lot of unbelief. And yet God, in faithfulness, brought them through after having to discipline them and a lot of things taking place, but brought that generation, their children, into the promised land, even though they didn't make it because of their unbelief. We are the people that have the privilege of walking into a relationship with the Lord that would bring us without any question, through the grace of God, into the promised land. The land that He's promised us, heaven. And to take as many people with us as we possibly can as we allow Him to work in us to fulfill that commission that is there. We recognize that the family is of vital importance. In fact, we recognize that God created Adam and Eve and told them to reproduce. So children were very important within that family life. And it was that family became and was the foundation of human life. You know, it kind of tells you in wrong relationships, homosexual relationships and other things where there can't be a reproduction taking place, what would happen if that was the society that we lived in and all those things took place? It wouldn't be too long before the society was extinct. We are the people that walk in a relationship to God to where He put things together to bless us, to bless the family, to bless the relationships together, and to bless it with fruitfulness of children. And that fruitfulness is so many times dependent upon the life, the character, the love, the forgiveness, the blessings of being together as a family. How we need the family. And what we recognize is as the family goes, so goes society. You know, every generation is to honor the God, and that way to honor God is honor God through a family that is committed over to the ways of the Lord. And so God has established society to survive and to become successful because of strong family relationships together. And so fathers and mothers are to come to the place of respect, of honor, of love, of relationship that would be showing the value that is there in the family as God has designed it to be. He's put the value upon that. And so fathers and mothers who respect each other are going to reap the results of that. Fathers and mothers who don't respect each other are going to reap the result of that disintegration in society. Society is affected by the good and the bad. And so the family is so critical. And so what we recognize is if we don't walk in God's ways, if we don't walk according to the will of God, if we don't walk according to the values and the morals and the integrity and the honesty and all of the things that God puts into our lives and into our family lives, we recognize that society goes down. And it goes down into a Romans 1 focus to where that rejection of God causes us to focus in our self-focuses. And those self-focuses, after they don't find fulfillment, because of all that selfishness, it goes to more of a deeper depravity until there's a total depravity, and that society ends up wiping out. God hasn't designed it that way. We recognize that every person in the world, young and old, have a parent. Isn't that amazing? You aren't here because you didn't have parents. You're here because you had parents. And what God has called us to do is to show honor, to show respect to our parents is foundational to the growth and the family that God has designed us to live in and represent Him through to a society. Our marriage is that way, our families are that way, and God has designed those to be an example of His grace, of His mercy, of His forgiveness, of His patience, of His love. And we have that great privilege, being a member of that family. We've all got the parents, and if you haven't got there yet as a parent, one of these days you probably will. And so we recognize that those things that happen in relationships are going to be passed down through generations. So, honor and respect, they're to permeate our hearts and our lives as part of the family, as a family of God. We are to be honor and respecting one another. And we see that honor and respect permeating through society, or the lack of honor and the lack of respect, it also permeates through the society. And God has designed that Christian people show this characteristic of honoring their parents that would be sometimes so radically in opposition to what the world puts out there, and the self-centeredness that the world lives in their lives and through their lives. And yet God shows us as Christian people, given this command, given this blessing, and the blessings of God are designed, or the commands of God are designed to be the blessings that we can live by, but He designed that, honoring the father and the mother. What does honor mean? In Hebrew it says it's to respect, to esteem highly, to regard, and to reverence. In Greek, it means to esteem and to value our parents as precious. How about that? Do you value your parents as precious? How about you kids? No answer. How about the parents? Do they value their kids as honorable and precious? I hope so. Okay, so we know that is so critical. And to show them respect, to show them reverence, and to be kind and obedient to that relationship that God has established. So honor. And so it's described in the Word of God, and we go back to Ephesians 6, the first 3 verses, and actually the 4th verse too, but we see the honor and the respect, and it talks about obedience, and that's part of honor and respect. How do we honor and respect? Well, the first thing, turn over to Ephesians, the 6th chapter, and we see that the very first thing in that honor and respect is this: children, verse 1, Ephesians 6, verse 1, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. It's the only right thing to do. It's the right thing to do. It makes sense. Relationships are established that are beautiful when this is truth. Honor your father and your mother, which is the first commandment with promise, that it may be well with you and you may live long on the earth. So you have the promise, you have the obedience that is required, and the respect, and the things that come out of that are beautiful relationships. So what he's trying to tell us here, the children are to obey the parents and honor their mother and their father, and is again the first commandment with promise. Second thing that we need to grab hold of, it says here, children, obey your parents in the Lord, for this is right. What does that mean? That means that I'm listening. I got to listen. If I'm going to honor my parents, I need to listen to my parents. I don't turn them off. I don't sit there and say, oh, well, I got a banana in my ear, I can't hear, or whatever. You're too young to have hearing aids, most of you. And so you can honor your parents. And if we get too old, if we still have parents living, we need to honor them. And if they're gone, we need to speak well of them as much as we possibly can. Bless, speak well of, do the things that are going to be a blessing and building up a proper focus on that relationship. So listening and obeying to their instruction. Now, Proverbs has many, many things to say. Just a few things that Proverbs says. It just speaks of this. Proverbs 1:8 says, my son. By the way, my son means builder of the family name. So you're not just building your family name, you're building the name of the family of God. If you're a Christian person, there's two things that you're going on here. You're building the family of God. You're honoring the family of God. And you're also building up your own family's name with honor and respect. And if we're destroying that, where obviously is hurting our family relationships and is really going totally against the ways of God, as He is our Father, if we're a Christian person. So my son, hear, listen to the instruction of your father, and don't forsake the law of your mother. And of course, this was David's instruction and Bathsheba's instruction to Solomon. Solomon's putting this into writing of what he was learning through his parents. And so we see these instructions here, and he says the result of that, verse 9, he says, "For they will be a graceful ornament on your head and chains about your neck." In other words, parental instruction is not a burden. Oh, how we don't like to see that sometimes. I don't want to hear, I don't want to listen to what my parents have to say. You know, they're just not very smart. But when you get a little older, you realize, oh, my parents were really smart. What happened to me? Why was I rebellious in my youth? It doesn't even make sense. As I get older, I realize all the issues that go on in life. And so that parental instruction is not a burden, but it's an enhancement. And it is a means of increasing attractiveness through building godly character. Whenever you see godly character within a person, is it a blessing? Is it a curse? No, it is not a curse. You see, ungodly character becomes a curse. It's not a blessing. Yet the world looks at ungodly character so many times as if that's the way to live out a life. And the result of that is tragedy, stepping on people, not caring about other people, putting others people as if they don't exist. You're the chief guy. You know, you're the one that's going to be the show. You're the hero. All that kind of stuff comes into your mind as you're putting yourself into that position of almost being a lord over the circumstances and situations of your life, forgetting who is Lord. And God has laid out this perspective of honor to parents and to be a blessing and enhancement, a work where you begin to display the beauty of the character and the love and the forgiveness and the patience and long-suffering of God. All those things are there in that beautiful relationship. Proverbs 23:22. It just says this: listen and never despise your parents when you're old. Honoring parents is listening to the parents. Again, listening. Don't despise them when they are old. You know, you see so many times, and I've walked into many, many nursing homes and even hospitals many, many times, to where, and especially nursing homes, they have nobody visiting them. They have no children coming to see them. No grandchildren coming to see them. Relationships have not been established that have been godly, beautiful, desirable relationships. And so bitterness is built. And over the years, until the final ending time, the results are you're reaping sometimes what you've sown. And it's a tragic story. We don't want to do that. Not as Christian people. And so we need to listen. And then it says, listen to your father who kept you, and don't despise your mother, or be ashamed of her when she is old. You know, when I was young, I thought 40 years old was pretty old. Now it doesn't look old at all. Even 100 sometimes doesn't look very old, but I don't think I'll ever make that, and I don't think I want to make that. But it doesn't seem to be very old as we get closer to those times. Okay, another Proverbs 10 verse 1. It says another aspect of honor, to act wisely, not foolishly. A wise son makes a glad father, but a foolish son is a grief to his mother. You know, what is the result of that? You know what it says in Proverbs, in 2 Timothy 3:15. We have this example of Paul writing to Timothy, and we see the result of his mother and his grandmother's influence into his life. And this is what he says, that from childhood, talking to Timothy, you have known the Holy Scriptures, which are able to make you wise for salvation through faith, which is in Jesus Christ. Timothy was taught by his mother and his grandmother. And when we are doing what we do, purposefully, we're loving, we're showing kindness, we're showing respect for our children, we're not provoking them to wrath and driving them away from us. We're loving them. Now they make choices, we make choices, But in that process, the very normal thing that usually can take place is that those children honor and respect, and many times will adopt the ways of the parents and even their religion. And that's great for a Christian, because that's what we desire, is to see our children come to know the Lord, even at a very early age, and to stay in that position of steadfastness and blessing as they grow up. And then to honor, also it means to respect our parents so much that it shows in our respect towards other people. You know, you see people that honor their parents. You know, I can look at my kids, my grandkids, and great-grandkids now, and you can look at some of the examples we have right here in this very church body, and we see honoring of parents. And what we see is it shows their respect for other people. Look at them. Do they respect others? Yeah. Where's the foundation for that? Right relationships with parents. And it's exemplified by the fact that it is going to spill right over to the relationships with other people. Wonderful. So, William Barclay said this is a quote, "Of all the commandments, this should be the easiest to obey. It is a commandment built into the very structure of life in every society." In ancient Greece, Solon, who was a Greek lawgiver, very famous one, very great one, he laid it down this way. This is a quotation again. "If a son did not respect his parents in their old age when they needed support, he should lose his right to citizenship." Now, that's not what we're doing in America, is it? No, we're trying to bring in all these aliens, these people that hate America, who are wanting to change America. We're bringing them in. And he says, hey, if they don't have a honor and a respect for the parents, then they don't have a right to citizenship. Amazing. Wow, that's almost like building a border wall. So the Greeks believed that to honor their parents was a basic part of every citizen in the state. That's important. It was unnatural. They believed it was unnatural to not honor your parents. Now, why us? Why should we honor our parents? Well, I want to tell you, out of gratitude, we should honor our parents. Did they bring us into the world? Did they sacrifice years of their life for us? I'll tell you, if we've had good parents, we should be the most grateful people in the world. Godly Christian parents raising godly Christian sons and daughters are going to find the results of that relationship being established through their children's life, through their grandchildren's life, because they're going to continue on that very same honor, respect, and perspective that they've been given by their parents. So out of gratitude, we owe our parents our lives. We were dependent upon them for food and for clothes and for shelter and for protection for years. And that is so important. And when we were totally vulnerable, we lived under their authority. And they could do good or they could do bad. But praise God for those that have done good. So when they invested their lives in us, and we have been the recipients of blessings that they've given to us, out of that respect of gratefulness and respect that we've given to them, we should be honoring them by the life that we live to bless them. And we should be so grateful when our parents get a little older to give sacrificially for their health and upkeep. I mean, just to keep them with us as much and as long as we possibly can. Ingratitude, it's the ugliest, the most hurtful attitude we can have towards our parents. How do you like sons and daughters that are ungrateful? Do they bless you? How were you when you were growing up? Did you bless your parents? And we reap the results of some of that stuff in our lives. So there's a lot of things, if we would listen to our parents as they raise us up and raise us up to be good, godly, in the ways of the Lord, even non-believing parents that raise godly or good kids, respectable kids, moral kids, honest kids, all of those things. Those parents have given so much advice, and the child that takes and adheres to the advice of the parents is kept away from so many pitfalls. Because often when we're growing up, we think, well, my parents, now we get older, we think, oh, they don't know what they're doing. They don't have it all together. Well, they're not perfect. My goodness. And we're certainly displaying our imperfections as we go into a position of rebellion or dishonor towards our parents. Really sad. It's kind of like a guy going on a journey, and so he's going into a place that he doesn't know about. And so, like most of us guys, we think, well, I can figure this out. Finally, we'll stop and get a map, or we'll ask directions, or we'll do something. And when we honor our parents, it's like, let's get the map. Let's get the instruction. Let's get the direction. Let's not be foolishly running around all over the place, causing troubles, not knowing where we're going, blind, living by what we think, our emotional focuses, and getting ourselves into tragic situations and tragic troubles that God would say, if you would listen to your parents, you wouldn't have ever gotten involved in that kind of foolishness. We all can look back. We've all had a past in our life and wish sometimes that we would have done things differently within our own lives. You know, our parents, good parents, know what's right from wrong. And even if they have had a life themselves to where they've had a tough time and they've turned around, they are able to give instructions and guidance and leadership that we desperately need as we're growing up in our life. And so it'll keep us out of a whole lot of trouble if we would listen to our parents. And so the question then comes, how in the world are we learning from our parents? Well, we know that they teach us. They need to teach us. They need to instruct us. But you know, they can do all that and not live the example. And what good is that? Because who are you going to follow? You're going to become like your teacher and his character most of the time, or in rebellion to who he is and how he blew it, and you react against it. That example of the parent is the best teacher, and it gives the right focus when we want to teach them because they recognize his truth. We're living it out in our own life. And so we are to create an atmosphere of honor and respect as parents, and honoring and respecting our parents, and showing forth that to our children as we honor and respect them. So this is what it speaks about in Proverbs 22:6. It says that we are the parent that is instructing his children in the way of the Lord. He says when that child gets old, he will not depart from it. Well, what does that say? It's not a guarantee that that's going to happen 100% of the time. But it is a guarantee that that is a general direction that's going to take place as we put application to that principle. We say, what does it mean to do that? It means to narrow them into a disciplined way of life. In other words, you don't just sit there and say, well, whatever you want to do, just go do. Oh, you want to do that? You want to go over here? You want to watch that? You want to... No, it's not. It's taking authority, taking control from a little tiny baby and beginning to instruct, beginning to teach them. Another focus of that is to touch the palate, to be able to take and put and eat what you're doing, put application to what you're doing into the life of the child. Putting application to what you are doing, not what you're saying, your example, into the life of that child. So touching the palate, but narrowing them into a disciplined way of life. They just don't let them go run free. They'll go find the ways of the world. They'll go find their own issues. They'll go, like children, young people, babies, they need to be trained from the very earliest time. And when they get, that training isn't to bind them to yourself forever. That training is to instruct them in the ways of the Lord. Grow them up according to the bent that God has given to them until they are respectful. They have a position of responsibility, and they're allowed more and more to come into a position of freedom because they're going to be a parent. They're going to become your equal, your friend. And you're going to be in great relationships with them. They get married, they have children, guess what? They're going to come to you for instruction, for encouragement, for correction, for a lot of things as they are leading their own kids. They'll put together what they've learned. And our example is so critical for that whole focus. What about parents who neglect or abuse their children? Does that ever happen? Yes, it does. It says here in you fathers, verse 4, Ephesians 6, verse 4, you fathers, do not provoke your children to wrath. And I'm not going to go into how all that happens. Someday we will. But bring them up in the training and in the admonition, the nurture of the Lord. Bring them up, godly. Train them godly. Example before them, godly focuses. And so we see that in people's lives that really honestly take this to heart. We see the children that are produced in that family becoming very godly children most of the time. They still have a will of their own, and that's one thing that we always have to recognize. But what happens to parents when they physically, materially, mentally abuse, sexually abuse their kids, abuse our kids? It's very, very serious. And so when it talks about children obey, and I want to come back to this, it means to submit to comply with, to hearken, to heed, to follow directions or guidance of some instruction that the parent gives. And so they're taught, they're trained, they're exampled to respect and honor and obedience. And the key is relationship, love. Love brings obedience. Love brings desire. Love creates passion. Love creates a desire to do what we know we ought to do. That's important. But the key to this whole thing, when it says here, children obey your parents, the key to that is in the Lord. In the Lord. That is a key. And it means two things. First thing it means is there is a limit to a child's obedience. You say, what causes the limit? When the parent is not acting in the Lord. They're abusing the child. Now I know that abuse today, the word abuse today is taken way out of reasonable truth. But when we have a parent that is beating to a point of black and blue and whatever else, or they're sexually assaulting their child, the child needs to go to another adult. If they can get out of that situation and escape, they need to go, but they need to go to authorities. They need to go to someone that would help them to get out of that relationship. They need to break free. And one of the most severe warnings, if you want to turn over to Matthew 18, 1-9, is Jesus talking about adults who abuse their children, and is spoken in the focus of servanthood. Turn over to Matthew 18, and we see this very serious focus. Matthew 18, starting with verse 1. It says, at that time the disciples came to Jesus, saying, who then is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven? Jesus called a little child to him, and he set him in the midst of them. And he said, assuredly I say to you, unless you are converted and become as little children, you will by no means enter the kingdom of heaven. Therefore, whoever humbles himself as this little child is the greatest in the kingdom of heaven. What Jesus is saying here, he's confronting the tendency of humans to associate authority with the exercise of domination. That's not what we're doing when we're raising our children. We're not exercising domination, like a Gestapo agent or somebody that has total authority over somebody is forcing them to do what they ought to do. We're in a position to where we're narrowing them into a way of life with desire. We're living it out in front of them. We're showing forth the beauty of a wonderful, loving relationship. And we're disciplining them. We're discipling them. We're correcting issues that are wrong. But we're doing it in love. Now, no parent, again, I say, is perfect. And yet, it's a blessing when we see a parent in love doing what they need to do. And when they blow it, they apologize. They ask forgiveness. They show honor. They show respect to their children. And those children are the recipients of a tremendous, tremendous blessing. And so we understand here from this passage of Scripture as we continue on here. It says in verse 5, then whoever receives one little child like this in my name receives me. So he's talking, he takes a little child, he puts it in the midst, and he says, you need to humble yourself as this little child has humbled himself under the authority of his parents. And not showing domination, but so many times we try to gain control over a person because of our own interests. And God is calling us to a childlike humility, to a childlike desire to be obedient, to a desire to please, to a desire to bless, as a servant would be responsible and respectful towards his master. So he's calling that. So then he says, now listen to this, because we see a severe result of a person that chooses not to go this route. He says, whoever causes one of these little ones who believes in me to sin, and you can use this for a child, you can use this for a new Christian, you can use this for a lot of things, but it would be better for him if a millstone, 100-pound weight, were hung around his neck and he were drowned in the depth of the sea. That is serious. How serious do we take our parenting? I pray we take it seriously. I pray that we would humble ourselves before God and say, oh God, your grace is sufficient. I want to walk in the path of righteousness. I want you to intervene. I want you to give me teaching, training, help me to know how to pull this together. We're committing our kids to you. We're committing our children. We're committing our grandchildren. We're committing all of these things to you to bring about a result. And God will honor that cry of dependency upon him. He does that. So he says, woe to the world because of offenses. For offenses must come. You can't stop them. That's just the world's way. But woe to that man by whom the offense comes. And then he tells you there's a remedy. It's a pretty rough remedy. Verse 8, if your hand or your foot causes you to sin, cut it off. Now he's not telling literally to cut it off. He's telling you take a drastic action and change your behavior. It's better for you to enter into life maimed or lame rather than having 2 hands or 2 feet and to be cast into everlasting fire. And then he says, if your eye causes you to sin, pluck it out, cast it from you. It's better for you to enter into life with 1 eye rather than having 2 eyes to be cast into hell fire. Now, it's not going to do any good to cut your leg off because you don't know and you haven't raised your children properly, you haven't lived out an example, and you say, cutting your eye out, that's not going to help you one little bit. But what is he saying here? He's saying, listen, he said, it's better if you cause one of these little ones to sin, it'd be better for you to be thrown over the bridge with a 100-pound weight on your neck. In other words, he says, take a radical action and don't go that direction. Stop it. Get yourself into a position to where you want relationship more than anything else in your life. And that relationship is to bring them into relationship with you, but to bring them into relationship with God. You want to take them to heaven with you. And we do. We want our kids to be right there with us. We want our grandkids to be right there with us. There's an issue here that's so important. Well, on the other side of the issue, abusive children dishonor their parents. And so, again, how are they abusive? Well, let me just list: talking back, being disrespectful in their attitudes, grumbling, complaining, ignoring, not listening, and establishing themselves as their own authority. What are the consequences? Listen to what it says in Proverbs 20:20. It says, whoso curses his father or his mother, his lamp or his life shall be put out in deep darkness. In other words, he's probably going to die young. Proverbs 30, verse 17. The eye that mocks his father and despises to obey his mother. The ravens of the valley shall pick it out, and the young eagles shall eat it. What do the ravens do when an animal is basically in the process of dying? They come and they pick on the eye. And they see when that animal is dead, what happens then is the other birds come in and just eat it up. It means death. And when we are not raising our kids, or if we're kids that are not showing honor and respect, look out. Because we're going to reap tragic consequences. We always reap what we sow. We don't always reap it in the time that we sow it, but we will reap it somewhere down the road. Now I want to just tell you my own example, tragic example. And I wish this had never happened. But as a sophomore in high school, I picked up an offense against my dad. And he put some pressure upon me, and so I submitted to it, but I did it without submitting in my heart at all. And so I became rebellious. And I still tried to show honor and respect, sort of, from an outside picture, but the heart was not honoring, it was not respecting my dad at all. And I did what I wanted to do. At the age of 16, I bought a car. He said, I don't want you to buy a car. I said, I'm going to buy a car. I had all kinds of money because I worked all the time. And so I went ahead and bought a car. And he came along and with me finally because he was trying to figure out how he could help me do what I should do in my rebellion. Then I reaped rebellious attitudes all the way through the rest of high school. I reaped it into 8 years of marriage life. Rebellion. And it was a tragic story. Well, when I got turned around, and the Lord got a hold of my life in November 14th, 1976, one of the very first things that I knew I had to do, and I had a heart to do it, was to get right with my dad. I wanted to get the relationship right. I wanted to establish a new relationship that had been broken. Yeah, we got along all right. Yes, we respected each other to an extent, but there was no real bonding together at all. And I wanted to get right. Well, the Lord has a way. He wants us to get right more than we want to get right. So I got poison oak, real bad, in my lower legs. I couldn't sleep. And so when this got to be unbearable, I went out to the track, which was close to us at the high school. I ran a mile, and it was in the wintertime. And I laid down, and I cooled down, and when I started itching real bad, and when I got cold, I got up and ran another mile. I did this all through the night. All through the night, I walked back to the house, or I ran back to the house after all this time, and by the time I was talking to God, God was dealing with me this whole time, and every time I'd lay down, and I'd sit there, and I'd just talk to God, and I was getting under such tremendous conviction of my sin, of rebellion against my dad. I knew I had to make this right. So after hours, I went home, showered, and took off, went to work. No sleep at all. And so then I thought, well, I'll be able to sleep that night, the next night. I came home from work. I started itching so bad. God was so merciful, so gracious. We don't always love the way He helps us out, but we need it. So I just sat down, and I wrote, and I wrote, and I wrote pages and pages of things that I had to deal with, and I had to deal with my dad, and get this thing squared away. And then I was kind of like Jonah. He was 3 days and 3 nights in the belly of the whale. I was 3 days and 2 nights in the belly of the whale. But I'm thankful that the whale vomited me out. I'm thankful that the Lord got a hold of me to the point that I knew that Christmas was right around the corner. My parents would be coming up from where they lived in Quincy, Washington. I was at George Fox College, or in Newburgh, not George Fox College, but I was at Newburgh. And so I knew that I needed to get the family together and work this thing out. So we got around in a circle, and I just began to lay out my first focus. I laid out my first focus, and the very thing that always angered me so much is my dad took totally over, total control, and just began to explain the whole thing. Then I went to the second focus. My wife was sitting there chewing her nails practically, thinking, what's John going to do? Is he going to blow up? What's he going to do with this situation? It's already developed, already, just like it used to be. And I went to the second situation, and guess what he did? He explained it all. He went through it and explained the whole thing. You know what I felt in my heart? Nothing but love and gratitude. I was so grateful for what he did. I was so grateful for his input. I was so grateful. Marilyn and I had a couple going to pick us up at noon to go to Portland. 11:30 came. It was already from 9 to 11:30, and I'm not sure what time it was. It was a couple hours anyway. I never got very far into all the stuff that I was going to cover at all. But there was something that already took place. God was working in such a powerful way. And I said, we need to stand and pray. Had a half an hour. Well, I'll tell you something. When we stood, my dad and I, next to each other, we grabbed our hands. We broke. We wept uncontrollably. And my dad, because of the freedom that came into his life, he started laughing uncontrollably. Then he started crying uncontrollably. Then he started laughing uncontrollably. We were so clean. We were so free. The burden of this terrible rebellious sin was gone. My two of my sisters, a foster sister and another one, were standing side by side. We had no idea they had problems. They broke. They cleaned up their relationship. We had a revival right there in that place. I'll tell you, when the Lord does something, it is real. When the Lord does something, it changes your life. And when we try to do stuff like this, it doesn't seem to work. It doesn't seem to be real. It doesn't seem to have any penetration. No lasting results so many times. But when God does it, it makes a difference in our life. And God works a powerful, powerful work that is literally life-changing. So this is so important for us to grab a hold of, that we need to know, I want this change in my life. I want it. I want to be free from this rebellious attitude that's in my life. So, abusive children also have another problem, and that is they reject their parents when they get old. That's a tragic story. They ignore the needs of their parents. They ignore their parents. They don't want to be involved in their parents' lives. They don't want to spend time. They don't want to spend money. They don't want to meet the needs of their parents. And this is a tragic focus that also takes place from a position of rebellion. And so what do? Well, we have an example again of the scribes and the Pharisees. If you want to turn to Mark, the 7th chapter, we have an example, tragic example. The scribes and the Pharisees, they were church leaders, interpreted the law, tried to live the law. And yet they put value in their hypocrisies upon themselves instead of upon what an obedient reaction and response to what God's word says. This is what happened, verse number 9, chapter 7, verse 9, starting with there. It says, all too well, Jesus speaking now to the scribes and the Pharisees that are so wound up in their religious focuses. He says, all too well, you reject the commandment of God that you may keep your tradition. For Moses said, honor your father and your mother. Isn't that the law that we're just looking at? Honor your father and the mother. And he who curses father and mother, let him be put to death. But you say, oh, how we can justify our actions. If a man says to his father or his mother, whatever profit you might have received from me is Corban. That is, it's a gift to God. I'm going to dedicate all my stuff to God. What a self-righteous, tragic focus that is when we neglect God-given responsibilities and try to make a religious focus out of it. It's nothing but hypocrisy at all. And he says, then you no longer let him do anything for his father and his mother, making the word of God of no effect through your tradition, through your desire, through your want to live in a selfish manner, which you have handed down, and many such things you do. And he's talking to the scribes and Pharisees that basically handed this idea of Corban down to give this gift to God. Well, what happens when you gave the gift to God? You can continue to enjoy all the benefits of that gift. Nobody else can. Nobody can touch all this. But you've committed it to God. Hallelujah. And you can go ahead and spend your time. You can spend your money. You can go on the vacations. You can do whatever you want to do with all that stuff. God says, hypocrisy, tragic focus. And then he says, whatever enters into a man, and you can say, whatever enters into a man's thoughts, whatever enters into his hearts, whatever enters into his wrong desires, it can defile him. And then what comes out of him are the things that defile him. In other words, his lack of honor, his lack of respect for his parents is what is defiling him, and it's being used to defile everybody else. It's a disaster. In 1 Timothy 5, 4 through 8, it gives an example of a widow having children, and it's used in the context of those that the church needs to be helping. But this is a principle. A widow having children or grandchildren, and they're refusing to take care of their parent or grandparent. It says In verse 8, it says, anyone who does not provide for his parental needs in his family fails to live up to the principles of the faith which he professes and is worse than an unbeliever who fulfills their family obligations. What a testimony. So, we have to go turn the corner. What are the promises of the guy that does honor his parents? Well, I want to go back to Exodus 20th chapter, verse 12. And it just says again, honor your father and your mother, that your days may be long upon the land which the Lord your God is giving you. Two tremendous blessings. What he's saying is he'll want you to live a full life. Could be an extended life. Could be a long life. But I want you to live a full life. And so, when you come into a home that is tension-filled, that is full of arguments, is full of divisions, full of abuse, full of neglect, full of rebellion, I'll tell you something, the conflict in that home and even the diseases that come into that home, and so often the life that's cut short within that home is a tragic focus, and it happens all the time. Proverbs 17:22, we find the other side of the story, a house that is filled with love, joy, peace, is strengthened by the health and emotional stability in that person's life. Is strengthened. And what it says in Proverbs 17:22, it says, a merry heart doeth good like a medicine, but a broken spirit dries up the bones. Maxie Duneman quoted this, made this quote, and I want to read it to you. It says, I believe one of the primary reasons Judaism has survived across the years is precisely its family structure. The Jews survived the Holocaust and thousands of years of anti-Semitism because the Jewish family had a sense of identity and a sense of order. It doesn't matter where the family is or was on the Sabbath. When the Sabbath comes, they stop and they pray. It didn't matter what Hitler did and all the powers of Nazism said. When Passover came, it was time to tell the story, even if the family was gathered in a concentration camp and there were no candles to light. There was a sense of order and identity that gave them roots and strength and perspective and discipline. At the heart of that family structure was reverence for parents, a high regard, a respect, and esteem for the older members of the family. The elderly were honored and cared for. What a testimony. You know, this is true about us, isn't it? When we honor our parents, we're going to find ourselves in a position of great blessing. We're going to find ourselves fulfilling exciting responsibilities, and we're going to see relationships just absolutely flourish right on to the end. And we're going to see that reciprocated, or whatever you call it, seen again in the life of our children, because what we did with our parents is going to be duplicated back in the life of our own kids and in their kids, and it goes right on down, can go right on down through generations. So this is an exciting focus, and what we want to do is to return the blessings that have been given to us. What does it do? It glorifies God. It makes Him known. It brings reality to a wonderful God. We need to honor our parents.